Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Eberlein. I'm the VP of Marketing at SōRSE Technology. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Introduction to CBD and Water-Soluble Emulsion Technology. You know, so much about consuming and understanding CBD is experiential, and while we can't meet y'all in person to share that experience at our annual event, we can still introduce you to our technology, but arguably more important, our team. While our clients' products are powered by SōRSE, SōRSE itself is very much powered by its people. Today's presenter is our very own VP of Technical Business Development, Michael Flemmens. Michael has worked on a patented new cancer treatment, had a Type 4 Drug Master file approved by the FDA, and received a JEFCA approval for a new food ingredient. But today, all we really care about is one thing. He's the guy, along with his 30-person R&D team, that will figure out how to put CBD in your product. A couple things before we get started here. There will be a live demo of SORSE CBD solutions after the presentation, so be sure to stick around for that. This webinar is also being recorded, so it will be available for viewing following the presentation. And there will also be a follow-up survey that you get in a follow-up email as well. To be most efficient with the time and make sure we cover everything, we ask that you submit your questions via the chat box below. After the presentation, we'll start a live Q&A. And anything we don't address during the presentation, we will follow up via email. That's it, Michael, you're up.
All right, thanks, Diana. Appreciate everybody tuning in. As Diana said, I'm the Vice President of Technical Business Development for SORSE. Today's topic, we're gonna try and do two things. Introduce everybody to some things that hopefully they may or may not already know about CBD itself, and then discuss how we can incorporate CBD as a water emulsion or water-based emulsion into food products. So that's my ugly face. You'll get to see me do the live demo later. We'd love to be able to do this live, but everybody's bandwidth suffers. One of the primary drivers why most people are here today is obviously the CBD market is expected to be rather substantial, and the growth rate is also expected to be rather substantial. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity across a lot of different market verticals and different applications. But in the world of business, that bar chart looks pretty nice. So first part, what is CBD? I mean, everybody talks about it. Most people know by now a good bit about it. So we're not going to focus too much on some of the basics. We'll go into a little bit more detail on some things that, based on our conversations with folks at different levels and at different places, that it seems to be impactful. One of the things that a lot of people don't have a great deal of understanding with is that hemp, the source of CBD, has been around and domesticated for a very, very long time, and has had a role across the globe in a number of different facets, whether it was for rope making, the fibers for rope making, to eating the seeds as a protein source. But it has migrated quite well across the world and has been used in a tremendous amount of applications. But how we got to where we are today was all thanks to the Farm Bill in 2018 that descheduled hemp production. The Farm Bill allowed for the cultivation and sale of hemp products, with the biggest carve out that the biomass cannot be more than 0.3% of THC. Surprisingly, with all of the press and all of the news and all of the education, we still probably get 10 or 12 different questions every week. Does CBD get me high? And I'm always happy to tell them no, but I'm still surprised that we still get the level of questions. Everyone is confused about hemp and marijuana. They think it's the same thing. It is relatively in the same family, Unfortunately, or fortunately, the hemp and the Farm Bill, it must be lower than 0.3% of THC. And is regardless of how many times we've said it or other people have said it or it's been in the news, people still mistakenly think that taking CBD is going to get them high or cause them to fail a drug test. There's a number of topics that we collectively like to call cannabis conundrums. These are things to which the industry as a whole still finds challenging, unanswered, uncertain areas. And it's a wide sweeping number of different topics, and we'll kind of go through them little by little. The FDA, right? The poor FDA, the Congress essentially threw a hot potato to the FDA and said, well, we descheduled it, you deal with it now. So the industry, the cannabis industry as a whole is, eagerly anticipating what the FDA is going to do and how they're going to do it. But through no fault of their own, the FDA has sort of been tasked with this hot potato, which is a ever complex, ever evolving marketplace and material. So we still yet don't know when we're going to get any guidance for the FDA, but I don't know if the industry as a whole really can blame them, because it is a rather complicated matter. And they were kind of caught off guard with it to some extent. We don't know what form the FDA is going to allow, or forms. We don't know. It's likely that we know that the approval is going to come in a number of different FDA silos. If you're not incredibly familiar with the FDA, most of the silos are broken out onto pharmaceutical products, veterinary foods and feeds, medical device, and food drug, and then there's the supplement silo. So are people going to get approval through some sort of GRAS petition, self-affirmed GRAS, the supplement market? Are we going to get approval through an NDI process? There's really not a definitively clear path yet. I mean, the paths are clear, but how they're going to be received is not clear. One of the interesting components of CBD is the association of cannabis extracts and the terpenes that are present in the plant. There's an interesting group called NAFs. If you're not familiar with NAFs, it is a flavor and fragrance consortium, and they have a unique position where they have an expert panel that the FDA looks to provide them guidance when the flavor industry wants to get a new food additive approved. They will, on many cases, take the guidance of this expert panel for NAFs for approving new flavors. If a flavor company wants to approve beta-caryophyllene as a flavor component for a particular product, and it hasn't already been approved, the quickest route for NAFs is to claim that beta-caryophyllene has no therapeutic value, it is simply a flavor. And for many, many instances with all of the associated terpenes, this is the stance that NAFs has taken. Unfortunately for many of us in the cannabis industry, we believe slightly differently than NAFs. We do believe that there are some therapeutic values for the terpenes. Now, the quandary becomes, if a material was previously approved because it was suggested it has no therapeutic value, and now you're suggesting it has therapeutic value, does it now become off limits for flavor companies to use? It's an interesting quandary that the FDA is going to have to deal with. And we're also seeing a great preponderance of the new medical research is also suggesting, whether it's terpenes or a combination of terpenes and other cannabinoids, has some therapeutic or synergistic effect. So the research is beginning to grow and grow that these terpenes do in fact play some role, whether it's transportation through the skin or helping improve the efficacy of a certain cannabinoid. But it's going to be an interesting discussion for inside the FDA for how they now deal with a compound like that. One of the biggest questions we're always asked is, should I use isolate or should I use broad spectrum? That's also going to be an incredibly interesting approach for what the FDA is going to have to deal with. In most cases, the regulatory bodies, whether it's the FDA or the EU or JP, Health Canada, many regulatory bodies prefer to have a compound in its neatest, cleanest, most pure form, and that would be isolate. But that's unfortunately, it seems like the regulatory bodies in Europe are perhaps going the isolate route because it seems to be the cleanest. In the US, it looks like the FDA may be leaning a little bit towards broad spectrum. But clearly we have no definitive answer yet, but that the preponderance of conversation seems to be of that vein. But how does one accurately develop a monograph of a broad spectrum product that contains how many cannabinoids and X amount of terpenes and flavonoids? It's a bit like trying to know the contents of the garbage truck every week that it goes past your house. It's almost impossible. The varietals of the hemp plant are different. The extraction techniques create a different output. So this becomes very challenging for how you're effectively going to regulate a product that is so varied, whether from lot to lot or from user to user. Another huge component we're always asked is, look, how should I be labeling my product? You know, do I call it CBD? Do I call it hemp extract? The answer, we don't know yet. There's a large preponderance of the industry that has migrated away from specifically calling it CBD on their label claims and are now moving to hemp extract. That seems to be the way the industry is going, but again, we'll have to wait for regulatory guidance or direction on what the most preferred or approved path will be. An additional component would be the dosage. What's the max dosage that I can put in my product? Again, we're still waiting for guidance. Consumers are becoming very savvy. If they can pick up a 15 milligram product for $5 or a 20 milligram product for $5, they want the highest potency for the same price. That being said, is there a limit on what any other regulatory bodies are going to suggest is a single serving maximum dose? That is yet to be determined. Also, in correlation with that is, what's the total allowable dosage that I can take throughout the day? Am I allowed to take, is it suggested that I not exceed 100 milligrams a given day? Or is it 150? Is it 50? We just don't know yet. A lot of that is going to be predicated on the approval packets that the industry puts in front of the FDA, giving them guidance on all of the safety and toxicity data that they've done to date, which suggests that this is an allowable limit. For those of you that have been in an industry for a while and have been, we've all been witnessing the evolution of, at first it was just CBD or hemp extract, and now folks are getting much more sophisticated in these designer or boutique systems where it could be a combination of CBD and some of the minors like CBN or CBV. It could be CBD and specific terpene strains that have a purported therapeutic value, or it could be even muddier and could be CBD, CBN, and specific terpenes. Those designer systems are going to be an interesting challenge. Are businesses going to be required to test each designer system for safety and efficacy and toxicity? Or are you going to be able to lump them all under one submission? That will be an interesting evolution as the FDA tries to decide these things. The other big component is, what's the source? Is it going to be an cannabinoid extract from a plant? Are we going to be allowed to use synthetically derived materials? And then there are also some companies that are working on a biosynthetic approach where some gene splicing has occurred in yeast or algae, and then the yeast algae produce cannabinoids. The thought process being that it's a much more cost-effective approach eventually, hopefully, to deliver cannabinoids. And what stance is are you allowed to have a plant extract of heavy CBD with a synthetic CBN added in the end? These are some really outstanding questions to all of the regulatory bodies, quite frankly, across the globe. And I think given the magnitude of questions and the magnitude of the complexity of dealing with CBD and cannabinoids, it's a pretty high hurdle for any of these regulatory bodies to deal with. So I'll take one small step back and talk about, like, what are cannabinoids? I think most people by now are familiar what the origination of cannabinoids is, that they are compounds secreted by, in hemp or in some cases marijuana. Everyone is most familiar with CBD and THC, but we're suggesting now that there are potentially over 110 different individual cannabinoids that all have the ability to interact with our own internal and endocannabinoid system. I apologize for the eye chart, but this is kind of it's a pretty big topic, and something that I don't think a lot of people pay a lot of attention to is that the endocannabinoid system looks like it may become one of the most researched systems in a long, long time. Cannabinoids and endocannabinoids, or endogenous cannabinoids, appear to play a role in developing stasis inside a human being. So what does that mean? Oftentimes your body gets out of whack, whether it could be either you had an injury, or you're stressed out at work, or you're anxious about being trapped in your home and catching COVID. But all of these stressors in life tend to throw your body out of balance. And what we're starting to learn is that the cannabinoids and the endogenous cannabinoids play a role in putting your body back into balance. And I think you see that's evident in some of the therapeutic suggestions that are put forth. We never want to make structure function claims, but there are certain suggestions that certain cannabinoids, certain terpenes, certain combinations could potentially promote a more restful sleep at night. And they do so by interacting with the endocannabinoid system. There's three main parts of that endocannabinoid system. They're the endocannabinoids themselves, the receptors to which they attach themselves, and then some enzymes that deal with getting rid of them and getting them out of your body. We're not going to focus a lot on the enzymes, but more so on your body already produces cannabinoids. These are called endogenous cannabinoids. Every human being on the planet, minus a small fraction, have the ability to produce cannabinoids and have been producing cannabinoids since the dawn of time. The evolution of your body, you produce these things. There's two primary types that get produced, and they're produced by the body when the body senses that itself is out of balance. That makes it very challenging for researchers to understand what's a normal level, because there may not be a normal level. The body may not need this particular cannabinoid right now because maybe you're completely relaxed laying on the beach with a drink in your hand. You're not super stressed right now. So you may not need it. So if you do blood levels, you're going to find that they're very, very low on this. Now you're studying or cramming for a test, and you can't sleep at night. The neighbors are playing too much loud music, and now you're stressed out. But now your body starts to produce these cannabinoids to deal with the stress, then we can get some levels, but it's very, very hard to figure out what a normal threshold looks like. There's two main types of receptors. The CB1 receptors, found mostly in the central nervous system, and then fairly recently discovered CB2 receptors that are in your peripheral nervous system. Both the endogenous cannabinoids that your body produces and any cannabinoids that are introduced to your system via cannabis all bind to these receptors. And they bind to the receptors where it's most impactful to bind to the receptors. So if you have inflammation from an injury, you're going to find that a lot of cannabinoids are binding to your CBD receptors to help reduce that inflammation. There's a huge amount of studies going on, research going on right now. And what they're finding is that these and some other systems are being impacted by the ability of cannabinoids to interact with these two receptors. Anecdotally, we've known, and there's some scientific research behind the fact that cancer patients are often prescribed THC and marijuana because it helps alleviate pain, it helps increase their appetite. You know, these are all things, and you can see the appetite and digestion is one of the primary ones right at the top of the list. So there are a lot of research going on currently. The challenge before was that because hemp was a Schedule I drug, unless you had a DEA approved license to deal with those type of materials, you could not conduct research. So if it's too challenging for institutions to create research or conduct research, and there's not a lot of potential economic value for folks to do the research just wasn't getting done. So you see a huge, huge increase in the testing and research that's going on right now. Terpenes are another component to the cannabis plant. They're very, very important as far as increasing efficacy or with the cannabinoids. And right now we think that there's maybe over 200 different terpenes that exist in the cannabis plants. They're mostly noted for producing the flavor and aroma of cannabis, but they also tend to have different therapeutic effects. And the work is ongoing. But what's really nice is that these cannabinoids and the terpenes, and to some extent the flavonoids that are inside the hemp plant, build something called the entourage effect. So there is a synergistic effect of having certain compounds together to elicit and making the product much, much more efficacious. So if you were just to put CBD oil that was devoid of terpenes on your skin, your skin contains some CB2 receptors. Certain percentage of that CBD would interact with the CB2 receptors. But now you combine that CBD with some specific terpenes that potentially act as penetration enhancers to drag some more of the CBD into the skin. Now you have a much more efficacious product. The effects of THC are enhanced by even a small percentage of CBD. So that's why most people tend to gravitate towards the broad spectrum products, is these broad spectrum products tend to have this entourage effect and become much more efficacious. So how do we get the extracts themselves? Predominantly, there's 4 major types, and each one of these types has, some subcategories. CO2 extraction, there's supercritical CO2 extraction, so we just lump them all under CO2. Each one of them has some pros and cons about the extraction technique. Some bring with it chlorophylls, some don't bring chlorophylls, some bring more of terpenes. So the extraction technique really should be looked at as like, what are you trying to achieve? What are the product attributes that you're most looking to hit? Is it a reduced sensory? Is it the most efficacious product? Is it, whatever that is, you should talk to your suppliers about how is this product being extracted? what are the cost implications for the different extraction technique? What are the product attributes that we're looking for? You know, like some folks are looking for super high terpene levels. Well, in that case, you'd want to look for one particular extraction technique over another. Some do have some potentials, hydrocarbon solvent extraction techniques. They're very efficient and they're very inexpensive to use. It does come with a con that if you don't do a good remediation, you may have the chance for some potential levels of solvents to remain in your CBD extract, and depending on what the hydrocarbon was, maybe have some health and safety concerns. So there's a give and take and a balance based on extraction techniques. So each one of the extraction techniques, as the material is first extracted and then further refined, there's been a challenge within the industry to come up with an agreeable nomenclature for how we talk about these different levels of extracts. And NSF has come out with a really nice way of describing the different extracts. And as a standardizing body, they can do some testing of products. So SORSE has adopted essentially the NSF model, which we put out here. The crude extracts, all the way down through the isolate, the most minimally processed are the crude. Unfortunately, they carry with it the most sensory impact. If you're trying to make a really delicately flavored seltzer water, crude is probably not for you. Or even to some extent full spectrum, because it just carries with it so many more flavonoids and terpenes. And as you go down and you further refine it, you can extract where you get to isolate, which is essentially just CBD. Very little terpenes, very little left of anything else. It is the least amount of sensory, but the most pure form. So when you're looking at balancing efficaciousness versus sensory, you kind of want to pay attention to where you are in the spectrum. And there are some people who thought process is that isolate is probably going to be excluded as it's more considered a drug under the GW Pharma patent. And so we may have to stay up into the refined or standardized extracts. So when we switch from like, where does all this stuff come from, to how do I, as a product developer or a manufacturer of finished goods, like probably the 5 biggest hurdles we see for folks right now, first and foremost is obviously sensory. There is a school of thought that people want the most efficacious product, but they don't want it to taste really bad. There's a reason that kombucha tastes like kombucha. Like, it is a very polarizing product because it has a considerable amount of health and wellness attributes. Unfortunately, it tastes like kombucha. And some people love it, but some people just don't care for it. And they're like, I don't care how good it is for me. I just don't like it and I'm not drinking. You know, so there's the rationale as a product developer and the marketing folks getting involved is like, you have to determine what's your acceptable sensory threshold. And sometimes the best way to do that is just to go out into the marketplace and survey products and to find out, you know, this is a great product that has very low sensory, but yet if I look at the C of A, it contains just enough of the cannabinoids and terpenes where I think it is going to be an efficacious product. The next big hurdle for folks is dosage control. You're talking about adding constituent components into let's just call it beverage. If you're trying to do 15 milligrams of CBD into a beverage, your starting material is incredibly concentrated. So one tiny little variation in dosing can have huge impacts on the amount of CBD that you get in your product. And when you're certifying to a label claim, that becomes a very challenging proposition. Is, you know, when you when you go get an Advil and it's 200 milligrams of ibuprofen, you want it to be 200 milligrams of ibuprofen. If you get 25, that would be a problem. And since people are sending these products out for assays, and we live, unfortunately, in a very litigious society where some lawyer is going to go scoop your product and then send it to a lab and then wants to sue you because you didn't meet your label claims. Dosage control is a really important matter for just about anybody in a product, customer-facing product. Reliable and repeatable onset and duration is a big deal. If you go back to Advil, if you hurt your ankle and you want relief, you want to take that Advil and you want to know it's going to work in 20 or 30 minutes. You don't want it to work 15 minutes one day and the next day it takes 2 hours to kick in. You want it to work when you want it to work. There's quite a few people out there that have some familiarity with fish oil tablets. And depending on whether you take your fish oil tablets on an empty stomach or after a huge meal or when your metabolism is up after the gym, your body is going to process that fish oil differently. And there are a lot of people that will like take it and go, I hate it because I burp and I taste fish oil. Well, if you taste it, it's because it's just floating on your stomach contents and your body's not working. Now, conversely, if you take it on an empty stomach, it's very likely that your body will process it much quicker. So when you're ingesting oils and CBD, these CBD products are essentially CBD oils. When you ingest oils, if there's no other mechanism to help drag them into the stomach contents, it's very likely they're going to float on the surface of the stomach contents. So you're never going to get the same experience, the same repeatable time and time again onset of the cannabinoids. Manufacturing is a huge deal. There's a lot of people getting into the space that are not incredibly familiar with developing or manufacturing regulated products. We have customers, we run into people that like don't know what CGMP is, that don't know what a HACCP plan is, don't have recall plans. There's a lot of manufacturing requirements that are necessary for people getting into food production, topical supplement production. You know, the industry as a whole cannot afford to have a really bad public black eye. You know, we don't want, SORSE and a number of other companies that are in the CBD space have decided that we want to educate as many people as possible, because you don't want a company who doesn't understand what they're doing create a bad product, get it into the marketplace, and make a lot of people sick. It's going to give the industry as a whole a big black eye, and the industry just right now can't have that happen. So if we have to educate people, if our company, even our competitors, we will jointly educate other people on the appropriate mechanisms by which you use and manufacture these products. And then it gets back to labeling. There's been lots of news stories about people purchasing, gummies and drinks and tinctures, and then they go out and they get them tested, and the label claims are just either horribly wrong or wrong enough to cause concern. We've seen some examples where people are promoting a beverage with 20 milligrams of CBD in, and when it's tested, there was literally no CBD in there. As it turns out, they didn't have a robust manufacturing process, and when they added the oil to their tank, all the oil floated up to the top of the tank, and then the first 30,000, 40,000 cans essentially had no CBD in it, and the last 8,000 cans had all the CBD in it. This is just not a good thing for the industry to have. You're going to get sued, you're going to get in trouble, and you're just setting yourself up for issues. When it comes to delivering oils to beverage products, food products, there's not too many things on the planet that you can't make with a liquid or a powder. So at least in our opinion, and many of the people in the space are providing cannabinoids, CBD, terpene-rich products in the form of an emulsion. So if you go looking for an emulsion, there are certain characteristics that you'd always look for. First and foremost, one is consistent particle size. You want that particle size to be the same when you receive the product, when you're using the product in finished form, because if the particle size is changing, then something's going on with the emulsion. It's not stable. You really ideally would love to have 12 months stability. You know, not too many people, you know, we don't want to turn the CBD industry into the dairy industry where you have to, you know, your product is only a 7 to 14 day shelf life, and then you have to buyback programs and disposal programs. Ideally, you'd like to make this like a seltzer company where you can make your product and it doesn't matter how long it's been in distribution in the warehouse or on the store shelves, or even in your consumer's home. Like, you want that product to remain stable over the life cycle of the product. And then balanced density. This comes back to, you don't want all of the CBD either rising to the top or falling to the bottom, depending on the form or function of the food product. The consumer may or may not drink it all in one shot. You know, some people will open a seltzer, drink some of it, it sits on their desk for a while, maybe goes back in the fridge. You should have that product be homogeneous all the way throughout and not changing. And then once again, go back to the dosing thing. We can't stress enough that dosing is one of the most critical parameters. Just make sure you've got in the can or in the product what you said is on the label. And then there's some classic signs of emulsions not being stable. You'll get them to cream and ring out at the top. Sometimes they'll settle out to the bottom. But very common normal emulsion. So how do companies like SORSE or any other companies turn CBD oils into a water-soluble platform? There's 4 traditional methods to making oil in water emulsion. And then each one of these has different flavors, and sometimes you combine different groups together, but the easiest one is a physical or mechanical dispersion. There's a lot of ultrasonic dispersions on the market. There's some co-solvents on the market, and then you also have your standard more traditional emulsion forms. Physical mechanical dispersions, most people are familiar with Italian salad dressing. So it's separated, you shake it up, the oil goes into the water and vinegar phase just long enough for you to pour it on the salad. And then as you sit it on your table, the oil separates back out again. That's essentially just a physical dispersion. It's not built for stability. It doesn't protect any CBD oil. The CBD aroma, or the cannabinoid aroma, will persist. And it's very non-uniform. So while it is super easy and really cheap to make, it's not ideal for a consumer product. Ultrasonics are getting a lot of traction and play right now. They're produced through a cavitation that's generated by putting a sonic wave, propagating a sonic wave through the product. It basically breaks the oil droplets into smaller and smaller and smaller droplet size. So you can get very small particle sizes. Most of the techniques leverage a low molecular weight surfactant. There's a couple that are more in the natural realm, but many of them are not considered a natural product. So based on, if you as a product developer are trying to hit a natural or organic label claim, while certain can be done, it becomes more challenging and less, there's less options for ultrasonic dispersion. It's also very capital intensive. The units tend to be expensive. They draw a lot of utility costs. There's cooling required. and they don't scale super well. A lot of times you'll have to get incredibly big, expensive units or gang units together to get scale production. And there's one of the other drawbacks is you get some very intense localized heating. So you'd want to look at your cannabinoid profile pre and post processing to make sure that heat doesn't impact your product. Most of the folks that are doing this have a pretty good handle on that, and use an appropriate cooling jackets to keep that from becoming an issue. But it's just something to pay attention to. And then one thing that a lot of folks don't pay attention to is the horn. The unit that actually sends out the wave is called a horn. And those horns are traditionally made of stainless or titanium. Unfortunately, the super high energy used to produce the ultrasonic dispersions tend to shed metal into products. So you have to pay attention to the life of the horn. You can find in some cases, as the horns age, you can find increased levels of titanium in the product. It's just something to be concerned with. And again, most guys that are doing this know this and pay attention to it. It's just something, if you're investigating it at first, just if you're looking for a producer that's using this technique, just pay attention to. And then the one factor that is going to be an interesting discussion point for the FDA is that these ultrasonic dispersions the particle size is so small that some of the particles can actually be taken up by the cells in your body. And that may or may not be a good thing. You may not want to have your cells take up the particles based on whether you're ingesting them or applying them topically. They may aggregate inside the cells. There's most of the ultrasonic dispersions came out of the pharmaceutical realm. There's a lot of pharmaceutical products that are made with this technique. So the pharmaceutical companies can show that they have a safe product, but they tend to do a lot of testing just to show the FDA that it's safe. It'll be interesting to see what the FDA's position on this eventually will be. And then the smaller particles, less than 80 nanometers, can actually be taken up by the cell nuclei. And that, for all intents and purposes, is not necessarily a good thing. They've been some studies in the past, and they're starting to do more and more work. Some companies are just not willing to look at this particular production technique because of the safety concerns. Co-solvents approach, those are simply using a chemical that has a lipophilic head and a hydrophilic head that can essentially drag the oil into a water phase. Very quick. It does provide good solubility. It tends to provide good uniformity. There's not a lot of people, if you're looking for organic compliance or an all natural compliance, there's not a lot of selection. So that's a caveat. And because of that, it carries with it some label claim concerns. Also doesn't protect the flavor and aroma. And it's prone to something called scalping. If you're not familiar with scalping, it is a phenomenon inherent to products that are put into aluminum cans. The aluminum cans have a liner that is coated on the inside of the can, and it is to protect the aluminum from the contents of the can. So if you think about a soda, like whether it's Coke or Pepsi, you have a low pH beverage. If you put it into a standard aluminum can with no liner and you let it sit, eventually it can actually eat its way out of the can. The acids inside will start to pit and degrade the aluminum to the point where you can, number one, you have aluminum floating around in your beverage now, but number two, it could eat its way out. So the can manufacturers have been applying linings for a long time now to resist that. A few years ago, when all the noise about the BPA can liners and plastics came out, that was the preferred crosslinker of choice for many can manufacturers. It's a very, very efficient crosslinker. But as they remove BPA from the can liners, they can't find anything that is as efficient of a crosslinker as BPA. So what happens is you're left with an increased percentage of unreacted sites. And these unreacted sites have chemical functionality. Unfortunately for the cannabis industry, the functionality loves cannabinoids. And to some extent, terpenes and flavors. So what happens is, in an unprotected system, the cannabinoid oils and the terpenes and the flavors will actually attach themselves to the can liner. It's a phenomenon that the beer industry is very aware of, because the hop oils, which are essentially terpenes, much like the terpenes and cannabinoids, will attach to the can liners, and the flavor of the beer changes over time as it scalps. While that may not necessarily be a problem for the beer industry, your beer just doesn't taste as good as it once was. When you're in a regulated industry and you're making label claims to the contents of your products, and the product sticks to the can, and now the analytical lab can't find it or can't test it, it becomes a big problem. So it's just something to be aware of. If you're going to pack out in cans, there's likely to be some sort, degree, or type of scalping based on different emulsification approaches, and co-solvents tends to be probably the worst bad actor. There's some traditional emulsions, whether you're creating a micellular structure or a liposomal structure. These are interesting because the physical ordering isolates the oils from the water phase. Best way to describe a micellular structure is to think of the cannabinoids as the chocolate center of an M&M, and the micelle is the candy coating shell. So if you put an M&M in your mouth and you didn't chew it, it would take a while for you to dissolve the candy coating before you taste the chocolate. So the micellular structure protects the cannabinoids. It helps mitigate some of the scalping effects. It helps mitigate oxidation. It does, and by enrobing it in these different structures, you can reduce the sensory. It just doesn't provide the terpenes and the cannabinoids to your palate in a way that you can taste them. It does come with some negative drawbacks. It's sometimes, because you're now dealing with a larger particle size, you may have to do some density balancing on your oils. So you add components to the cannabinoid oil that makes them a little bit more dense, so they're less prone to rising out of the water column. And it does bring with it an increase in opacity. So the larger particles tend not to make a very good transparent or translucent beverage. But the nice part is there are usually enough compounds of interest that if you use some of the traditional emulsion techniques, you can more readily and easily get to an all-natural and or an organic version. So this describes a little bit of what I was talking about, of the size of the particle interacting with the light. So this is essentially the same formula, or a number of different formulas that have been through a result of the formulation change and a combination of processing change. We're able to generate different particle sizes. The bigger the particle is, the more ability it has to interact with light. So the light will come into the vial, it will interact with the oil droplet, and the oil droplet will either reflect or refract the light. And it's this manipulation of light that causes the haze or the opacity. So as you get smaller and smaller particles, there's less ability for the light to be impacted by the oil droplet, and you can get to a more translucent or clear platform. So there's give and takes when, just like when you're choosing which CBD extract, whether it's a full or a broad or an isolate, there's some impacts onto what do I want my label claim to be? Am I looking for all natural? Do I not care? Do I want it to be organic? Some people prefer the appearance of a haze to let their consumer know that they do in fact have a homogeneous product. Because if the example to the right, the coarse dispersion, if there was an imbalance in the emulsion and it went all the way to the top, you could very, very easily see a very dense white ring at the top of the vial. The one all the way to the left, if the CBD for some reason became unstable and either rose to the top or sunk to the bottom, there would be no ability for you to know that that occurred without some sophisticated analytical techniques. But so it's nice for consumers to know that, hey, I can tell that this is uniform because it's uniform. So now we get to do a little bit of the commercial speech. So anyone who is producing products with an emulsion, SORSE does, and there are a number of competitors out in the marketplace that also have outstanding products as well. But SORSE, we stand by, these are some of our pillars. You know, we use safe ingredients. We have a very homogeneous product. We have really long-term stability. We can help folks to get that dosing problem solved. We can, to some extent, improve the sensory and reduce the cannabis notes. We do have data on repeatable onset. We've done some clinical studies, continue to do more clinical studies where we actually do blood plasma levels of cannabinoids in real live humans. We give them formulations and we do blood draws at standard intervals, and then we test them for cannabis, the presence of these cannabinoids in their blood. So we're able to tell people like basically how long it hits their system and how quickly it gets out of their system. One of the biggest value props is this seamless integration into a production process. If you're a beverage manufacturer and you're already producing beverages, you simply add our emulsion right into the tank, just as you would a flavor or a color. Doesn't require any additional process equipment or elaborate techniques. You just kind of chuck it in the kettle and away you go. And then high degree of quality assurance. Most of the science team and regulatory team at SORSE has, I think we have over 200 years of experience inside the regulated FDA verticals. We have our own internal testing and still leverage third-party independent testing as well. And the product is incredibly scalable. We can supply 500 milliliters. We can supply 5,000 liters. Doesn't really matter. It scales from small to large very seamlessly. Our own products, we have liquid products. We don't have one liquid. We have, I don't even know how many SKUs we have anymore, but we make everything from kosher grades to organic to all natural to preserved to unpreserved. But most of our liquid products tend to go into the beverage market. We do make a standard spray dry powder. We actually take the liquid emulsion and spray dry it into a powder for, it can be dry goods, brownies, cookies, ice cream is a great one. And then for the really fast hydration, we make an agglomerated powder. Utility is mostly for stick packs, instant hydration, K-cups, tea bags, that kind of thing. And we say that if you use our SORSE product, some of the three biggest takeaways are you're getting a product that is made of completely safe ingredients. Most of our consumers have a very enjoyable and consistent sensory experience, and we are able to provide very accurate dosing and very consistent label claims. And the biggest take home is, regardless of what you do, make sure the first taste is the same as the last, and each taste has exactly the same amount of milligrams in it. When you get the demo, this video will be embedded, so you'll be able to watch all 3 different product categories. But it's much more fun to do it live. So I will turn on my webcam. There I am. So hopefully everybody can see this. But standard glass of water. So if you got a bright tank, beverage production facility, we'll just take a little bit of the liquid emulsion. You can see it already going in, and it's already hydrated. So if I work really hard, now I've got a CBD beverage. Doesn't get much easier than that. And on the powder side, same deal. This is the agglomerated powder, so it's intended to hydrate super, super fast. And you'll see it'll go in, and it's done. So if you want to make a stick pack, any other product, it's essentially you've got a CBD beverage instantly. So that's it for the demos, and I think we'll turn it over to Diana to help moderate some of anybody's questions, everything that's come in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. I know that some people have to drop off, so I just want to do a quick reminder before we do a couple of questions here that the webinar presentation today, a recording will be sent out to all attendees. And there will be a survey as well, so we'd love to hear your feedback so we can continue to deliver high quality educational content. Michael, let's jump into a couple of questions here. What's an area that you're currently looking forward to seeing CBD in terms of processed foods, protein powders, any area that you think is currently untapped?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me personally, and I'll just say it's for my own personal preference, we've found that there's a really cool application of post-workout products, whether they're a powder for a protein shake or part of a protein beverage. It seems like there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there that if you go to the gym and you have a crazy leg day, and you incorporate some CBD into your post-workout protein shake, it really, really helps reduce inflammation, and you tend not to get that post-workout like peg leg the next day. Some people are actually incorporating it into pre-workout, and they're able to work out a little bit longer. Again, this is all anecdotal, but we have employees at SORSE and customers and folks we work with that are all basically giving us the same feedback, that are saying that they get a better workout if they take it before, and they're a lot less sore afterwards if they take it after. And I haven't seen too many products in the marketplace that are going after that sort of vertical. So I'd love to see the products commercially available. I don't have a problem making my own, but it's nice to be able to grab and go something.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. There were a couple of questions looking for clarity on flavorless options or reduced flavor and sensory of our emulsions. Can you dive into that, especially with the different options of isolate and broad spectrum?
Sure. Yeah, there's a number of different approaches. So the isolate is the cleanest sensory, bar none. And then depending on your different emulsification techniques, that can help reduce. There's nothing that's tasteless. Even water has a taste. So like the cannabinoids, you're just looking to knock down the sensory as much as possible. We've seen in the marketplace people that are taking an isolate-based product and then adding some component of broad spectrum so that you get some carryover with with the efficacy for a broad spectrum, but not the same flavor profile as a full 100% broad spectrum. So being able to leverage the mix between, say, 60% isolate, 40% broad, that's one approach. Going full isolate is another approach. Using isolate in some specific terpenes. Some of the terpenes tend not to have a huge sensory load, so there are ways you can get around it. And then if you're taking it one step further and getting it into product development, there are certain flavors and certain flavor systems that tend to be very complementary to the flavor of cannabis. Many herbs, so like if you look at it like a thyme or rosemary, so if you could do an adjunct where it's a cherry thyme beverage, that thyme note will almost cover up any sensory that comes from the cannabis. You can actually even get away with like a whole full broad spectrum. And then the other attribute when you're looking for sensory is you may have to sacrifice your dosage. So if you're targeting a 30 milligram beverage, it's going to carry with it sometimes some sensory. You can dial that back. Going back to 15 or 20 milligrams will significantly reduce your sensory. So there's a number of different ways you can kind of go after it.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. And this will probably be our last question for today. So you guys can, get back to your days. I know we went a little bit over here, but rest assured, we will get back to you with all of your questions. We'll just reach out directly via email, which you use to register with. And then with our last question, we had some questions come in about seamless integration and the stability, meaning if you're adding the product at a certain time, is it impacted by heat? Can you go into a little bit of detail about the technology and what heat standards it can uphold against?
Yeah, sure. So for all intents and purposes, we typically work with our customer base to try and identify the best introduction point. Heat history, we have products that can survive certain heat histories for whether it's, the kinetic curve is always driven by temperature and time. So are you running an HDST or UHT where you're talking seconds, elevated temperature? Are you making a gummy, or you may not want to add it right into the cook phase, maybe as it's, approaching set temperatures. If it's a beverage, if there's so many different, can it be tunneled? Yes. Can it be retorted? Yes. Can we do different, can it do HPP? There's a lot of different sterilization, sanitization techniques that we can have it survive. But we like to work with all of our customers on a case by case and say, if you're willing to tell us a little bit about your process, we'll likely find the most advantageous introduction point.
Yeah, I definitely know that our team loves to be hands-on, and we definitely have a large team that supports a lot of our clients when they come on board with us. So thank you for explaining that, Michael. Really appreciate it. Great presentation today. I want to thank everyone for joining us and hanging tight as we ran a little bit over here. As a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be emailed out to all attendees, so you will have that information available. Also, feel free to download the handouts that are available on the side panel here. And we will reach out to anyone who submitted questions currently and via email. Thank you again for coming. Thank you, Michael, for a wonderful presentation. And please reach out to SORSE should you have any questions about CBD and our emulsion technology. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day, guys.
Thank you, guys.